Welcome to Mom in Mind, where we dive into all aspects of perinatal mental health and wellness related to conception, pregnancy, birth, loss, postpartum, and new parenthood. We raise the volume on these topics in hopes that someday everyone will have the support and information that they deserve before they need it. Please note this podcast is not a replacement for treatment by a professional or professional training. Welcome back to Mom in Mind. I'm your host, Dr. Kat. May is Maternal Mental Health Awareness Month, and Mom in Mind is dedicated to highlighting the lived experience of moms, partners, and families this month. We will also be celebrating our 100th episode of the Mom in Mind podcast on May 21st. And to honor that, we will share some of our own listeners' thoughts about their experiences and messages of hope. We're so honored and grateful to have you here with us on this podcast, especially for Maternal Mental Health Awareness Month. Today, we are talking with Kristina Cowan about her experience through traumatic birth and a postpartum thyroid condition, as well as her path to healing. She's written an amazing book that includes her experience, other stories of lived experience, and really great information from experts in the field. She wrote When Postpartum Packs a Punch, and we will learn a bit about that today. Kristina started writing when she was just 5. Years later, she earned a master's degree in journalism from Northwestern University, and these days she covers mental health and women's issues. She lives in the Chicago area with her husband and 2 young children. And When Postpartum Packs a Punch is her first book. Let's meet Kristina. Welcome, Kristina. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Kat. It's great to be here.
I have been hearing quite a bit about your book, When Postpartum Packs a Punch, and I'm very, very excited to share it with the listeners. But what I'd love to start off with is just hearing from you and about your story and what even led to you writing a book like this. So yeah, please start wherever you'd like about your story.
Sure, absolutely. So a little background on me. I'm a journalist by trade. I studied journalism school and graduate school, and I've been doing that for 20 years. So when I got pregnant with my first child, I had him in 2009, and I was doing other sorts of journalism when I was pregnant with him, very different from the book that I wrote about perinatal mood and anxiety disorders. And so having him actually turned me down a different path, which ended up being a very good thing. I was not planning on writing this book at all, I can tell you, when I was pregnant with him. I had a great pregnancy with him. My husband and I always wanted 2 children. And so we wanted to have him pretty much at the time that we had him. It couldn't have been better for that time in our lives. And everything went very well physically with the pregnancy. It was perfect. I didn't have any complications. And I thought, boy, this is almost too easy. And I did have some friends say that, who had babies, if something doesn't go wrong during the pregnancy, something will after. And I'm not, I'm just saying. And I thought, that's motherhood for you, right? So I moved through the pregnancy just fine. We were living in downtown Chicago, and I would even walk to my OB visits, and that was nice as they got closer together and I got bigger. And I had him in early March of 2009. My OB was great. She suggested toward the end that because I had such a good run, that why not induce? And we didn't know the gender. So she's saying, induce the baby on Monday. I'll be on call. The baby's due Thursday. Shouldn't be a problem. You're pretty advanced. I think you should get in and out of the hospital quickly. You can move on with your life. So I thought that sounded great. I'm somewhat type A when it comes to my work, especially. So I thought that's perfect. I can have the baby. I'll be back to writing within a week. I'm going to hire a nanny, all that good stuff. And things changed dramatically when I went into the hospital that Monday. I agreed to the induction. I was already in the early stages of labor when I went in, but they still hooked me up to Pitocin. I wasn't really familiar with Pitocin. I didn't do research on it, which in hindsight, I think that I should have. So they hooked me up, and for the first several hours, it was fine. But I reached a point where I was in extreme pain from the contractions. It was almost as if I stepped over a threshold and they went from manageable to unbearable. So I asked for an epidural, and that numbed me almost entirely. I mean, I've had no feeling from the waist down. And so when it came time to push, it was extremely difficult for me. And I put it together that if you're numb, how can you push? And my son's head was it was big. And they said, I was small frame to have a baby with a big head. Well, I don't know. I guess they didn't know that ahead of time. And he was sucking his thumb. I could not, I'd push and his head would come halfway out and then it would go back in. Mm-hmm. So after 3 hours of that, I was almost near total fatigue. So my OB said, why don't we try an intervention like forceps? And I said, okay. I didn't know what they were really even. I thought maybe like salad tongs. Well, mm-hmm. She brought them in and they were huge. And I thought, okay, that's interesting. But that's what we ended up using. And they worked instantly. Like she used them on one side and then the medical student helped her on the other and he came right out. But I ended up tearing. Mm-hmm. And I had a 3rd-degree tear and something else that I didn't really know could happen. I knew about episiotomies, but the hospital where I was didn't practice episiotomies. So they let me tear 3 degrees and I was fairly injured. She stitched me back together, but there was no explanation about what a tear involves, the pain, all those sorts of things. So I left the hospital early as well. The hospital asked us to leave 12 hours early. So I was injured. I was nursing. The nursing was the one thing that went great. Okay, I was nursing fine. I got home though, and probably within a half a day of getting home, I couldn't go to the bathroom. Mm-hmm. And this was a big problem, very big problem. So
they didn't make sure you could go to the bathroom before you left the hospital?
No, that I could urinate, yes, but not to relieve my bowels. So both of them shut down, though. My bowels and my bladder shut down at home. One, I think, triggered the other. Mm-hmm. So I went into the ER when my son was 3 days old, probably around midnight. And the receptionist in there said, why are you in here with a newborn? He could die. And,
oh my gosh.
And my husband was parking the car and I thought, I just started crying. And I think she realized what she had said. And, I let her know. I said, this is my first baby and we don't have any family here yet. And I feel like I'm going to die. I need help, So she sort of retraced her steps and found us a private room. And someone came and helped me learn to pump milk. Because I thought, well, if I'm with the doctor and the baby wakes up, he has no food. And I didn't want him to bottle feed, not yet. So that part went okay. And then the doctors came in probably after, we were in there probably 3.5 hours. And they helped me a little bit, but said, you're going to have to go to your doctor in the morning and have her hook you up to a catheter. They were able to drain my bladder in the hospital, and they said my bladder was distended. It was holding more than 2 times the normal amount.
Oh my gosh.
Of liquid.
How was that very painful?
Oh, yeah. It was worse than the birth. I couldn't imagine that something would be, and I had the epidural, so I didn't feel a lot, but it was excruciating pain. So they relieved me a little bit. I went home and then I did see my OB. She helped me. She hooked me up to a Foley catheter and sent me home with that for 3 days. I took some enemas and that all finally worked. So by the time my son's name is Noah, by the time he was 10 days old, I felt some physical relief. I felt better. I could walk normally.
Yeah, that's a long time.
It is a long time. And, through all of that, though, and I don't remember, I had the baby with me the whole time. I was not letting him out of my sight. And I kept nursing him. Even I had this Foley catheter around me and I had the baby on me. And, it feels very primal and like almost like you're an animal, and there's some beauty in that, but also it was very strange to me.
Yeah. So can I ask you a question about that period of time? You mentioned a couple of things that I heard. One, that you walked into the ER and thought you were going to die. That's a big feeling to have. Is that what was your emotional state like throughout this?
Yeah. So when I got home from the hospital, I already started to feel uneven, and I thought it was because of my hospital experience. I very much felt like they kicked us out. And this is a great hospital in downtown Chicago that should never have done that. And I felt like I had no voice. And here I am at home and I felt uneven at first. And then when I got to the ER, I mean, as my pain increased, I was terrified that I was going to die from it, that no one would be able to help me go to the bathroom, and that I would leave the baby, that I would strand him without a mom. That was the big image in my head going into the ER, that I was going to die, that no one was going to help me, and that the baby would be, without a mom. Because I had never been down this road. I didn't know, there was so many unknowns. Now, I felt a little better after leaving the ER. I felt a lot better when my OB said, "You're fine. We don't see this often. We usually see women incontinence. If they tear, they usually have incontinence." Well, I had the opposite. So, but she wasn't alarmed. She didn't think I was going to die. So when she thought I wasn't going to die, I thought, okay, well, I think I'm going to be okay. So once I felt physically like I could be okay, and I was okay, then mentally I started to crumble, which is, I guess, it's to be expected. It didn't occur to me in the moment, but as I look back, I thought, well, I had birth. That was traumatic. All of that, everything I just described to you was birth trauma. I had wonderful support from my husband and my family and my friends. However, I felt traumatized by what happened in the hospital. And I felt like I fell short as a mom. Like the first thing I did as a mom was a huge mistake. And, Noah had a couple of gashes on his face from the forceps, which they healed immediately. But as soon as I saw him, his face was bleeding. And that was my first image of my baby. And, you think back to it and you think, well, it's not so bad. But in that moment, it was horrifying to me. So it was like a nightmare, And then as you pull away from it, you think, well, what? That's not fair. My first experience with childbirth was nightmarish. And it took me a long time to reconcile that. So, I was crying a lot. That's how I knew something wasn't right. I cried about everything. I mean, people would call to see how I was doing, and I would cry. I was out on Michigan Avenue, and there was a little girl that waved to me, and I started crying. And I came back to my apartment, and my husband said, "What is wrong with you?" At first he thought, what's going on? And that's how I knew. And I liken it to an alien invading my body, because I felt like the old me flew away on a kite or something, and I was left with this weird alien feeling. And then I started getting the intrusive images probably a few days after the crying. And together, with both, I thought, this is just not right. I need to talk to someone. I didn't hide these things. I told my husband, I told my mother-in-law. My own mom died when I was 15, so I did not have her, which that was certainly part of the experience for me. I knew she wasn't going to be there, obviously, but going through the trauma, I needed her even more,
Yeah.
But I was open about what I experienced. And then I called my OB and I said, look, I'm having these weird images and I'm crying, and can you do something to help me? And, again, she was very receptive and said, hey, there's more than you would think from patients. We can get you to a talk therapist. And if you'd be open to antidepressants, you can take them. The one she suggested was sertraline, which is the generic of Zoloft. So I did some research and I thought, well, it can't hurt. I'll try it. And within 10 days of starting the sertraline, the crying spell stopped. And to my disbelief, I thought, there's no way a pill is going to make me stop crying.
Yeah, right.
But it did. And I needed that then, because I'm relatively impatient and I didn't want to just deal with the crying. The therapy also was a huge help. It let me just say everything that was in my mind and get everything out and walk through it and acknowledge it. And so those two things together were very effective. And also, and I say this in the book, that maybe an informal part of the therapy was telling my story to all my friends and family who would listen. And I didn't lie and say, oh, it's wonderful, or hide it. I had a little bit of shame, I guess, but I thought, if you're going to hold me accountable for this, then, it's probably not worth staying in touch with someone who would, would feel ashamed or something of me.
Yeah, that's a great point.
So, and I felt, what made me do that was sort of, I attribute it to this just feeling of, it's either I, deal with any kind of shame or I hide it. And I didn't know what would happen if I hid it. I wanted my baby to be okay, and I wanted myself to be okay for him. My instinct right away was to protect him, and I did it the only way I knew how to. So now I always encourage, moms and dads to find at least one person. You don't have to tell everybody what's going on, but one person that you trust. And that makes all the difference, I think, because the person that you trust is going to help you.
Yeah, this is not an uncommon experience, unfortunately. And I just appreciate so much you being open and willing to talk about it so that people can feel heard.
Yeah, and I'm happy to share my story. And I feel like, it's taking an unlovely experience and turning it into something good that helps other people. And I think that's the best that we can do,
Absolutely. Can I ask another question about just your process in getting out of all of this? So you had medication and you had therapy. How long did it take until you started feeling better? And how did you notice you were feeling better?
Sure. So I put it in 2 stages because I actually ended up developing Hashimoto's disease after Noah was born. Now, as to whether they're all along, I'll never know because my thyroid levels weren't checked until he was almost a year old. So I started to feel very good after I started the medication. So within like 2 weeks, the crying stopped and I could actually enjoy him. So he was probably about 6 weeks old and I loved it. I loved having the baby. I still had some intrusive images, but it got better and better. And then when he was about 6 months old, I got my first period and it lasted for about a month. And I thought, well, that's weird. I'm still nursing him. And doesn't nursing stop the period? I don't know. So I talked to my OB and she said, well, sometimes you can be nursing and get your period, but it shouldn't last a month. So we went back and forth for a while and I thought, well, maybe, and then I started to feel sad, not sad on the level that I did when he was first born, but just kind of low and extremely fatigued. He was a great sleeper. So I'd sleep with him 12 hours at night.
Wow.
He would nap, long naps. I would nap during the day and I could not stay awake. And I thought, something is wrong. And sure enough, I had my thyroid levels checked and my thyroid was very low. And then I went to an endocrinologist and had more tests. And we found out that I had Hashimoto's disease, which is an autoimmune disorder where your thyroid is, you're basically underproducing. So you're hypothyroid. Hypothyroidism can act like depression, can make you have a low mood, very similar to the symptoms of postpartum depression. And I thought, boy, I wonder if this was feeding into things when he was first born. But my endocrinologist said, it's good you went off the antidepressants because we might not have known to check for this, So I really felt back to myself when my son was about 1.5 years. And I say really because I needed my thyroid to be fixed to sort of complete the circle, having that be off made me feel off. So, and now I see the value of checking women, no matter what age you are. I was 34 when I had Noah, and my OB said, we didn't check you because usually women who are hypothyroid are in their 50s. And, now we know better. Now there's so much coming out about women much younger than that who have Hashimoto's. Yeah. So it's really important to check the thyroid levels before anything, because if that's off, you have to address that before anything else, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you for speaking to that. I hear about thyroid issues quite often in my, meeting with women, and it is implicated in quite a few things and quite a few symptoms that they're experiencing. If it's high or low, hypo or hyperthyroid, it really does a number on people. I think it should be a standard. You check this whether you have a history of it or not during pregnancy and postpartum for a couple of times.
Yeah, right. I agree with that. I think that would be wonderful if we could get to that point.
Yeah, well, maybe, people can advocate, hearing what you're describing and what we're talking about now, that people can advocate to get the thyroid checked. Just as a rule out, I think it's important.
Yeah, I do too.
In all of your process, what led you to think about writing this book, When Postpartum Packs a Punch?
Well, I mentioned earlier that I wanted to get right back to work, and I ended up taking almost a year off from any kind of writing. I just felt I needed the break. I couldn't stay not writing for long because it's what I'm wired to do. So early on, probably when Noah was a week or two old, I thought, well, if I can come to a point where I can write about this, I want to, and I want to help other people. And as I got healthier and better, I thought, well, I could write some stories. And my incentive to do that was because, when I was on the day-to-day stuff, when Noah was early on and I was feeling very low, I was looking for things to read. I wanted to hear from other moms. I wanted them to say, I had this. This is what I did. This is how I got better. You're going to be fine. And there wasn't a book out there. And I love to read books. I did find a blog or two that helped, but I wanted more. I wanted something I could hold in my hands that I could highlight. And so when, it came to the point where I was going to write about this, I thought, well, I don't know if I should do stories or, some articles and pitch them to publications, or I could write a book. And I talked anecdotally at first to people I knew. Mm-hmm. I had so much information just from them. I thought, well, if I widen it to a group of women I don't know, I bet you I could write a book. So I thought, well, I can do it. I can do the writing. I can do the reporting. And so I ended up writing the book that I wished I had at my fingertips when I went through it.
That's amazing. I just love that. When people's passions and their skill set intersects with things like this that happen in their life, and then they do something with it like you've done, I just think is so powerful. I'm not a journalist. I can't write the book that you can write. And the fact that, you're better, you got through it, and you're so passionate about, getting the word out and making sure people have good and correct information is so amazing to me. And like you said before, this is not the book you had imagined yourself writing, but here you are in this life circumstance, and your skill set supports you to be able to get the word out in a way that not many people can. And it's just so powerful. I'm really excited for people to read it.
Thank you. Yeah, I hope it helps.
So what can people expect in the book? How is it set up?
Yeah, so there's a few things to know about the book. The center of this book is story. It's the stories of moms and dads in the US and several in the UK who have encountered perinatal mood and anxiety disorders of one sort or another. It's the stories of them encountering those disorders and then how they sought treatment, how they healed and recovered, and what they're doing now, how they feel now, that sort of thing. So I do that throughout the book, and that's the lifeblood of the book. And I really wanted this to be for everybody, for parents, grandparents, friends, to give as a gift or to read for the knowledge. I also wanted it to be for providers and experts and researchers. So the book is pretty dense with, good information. It's not written at all, in a medical way. So it's very easy to read. The best research I could find, and the most recent, of course, now we know more. This was published last year, but it's a snapshot of the research that's out there, the best research I could find. And it's filled with good experts like Wendy Davis from PSI, John Abramowitz, who is, I think he's the forerunning expert on OCD in the country, if not in the world. Mm-hmm. I talked to him a bunch for my chapter on OCD. And just the sheer spine of the book, it's set up. First, I look at the different mood disorders. So, I give a chapter or so to each of those. Postpartum anxiety and depression is in one chapter. Mm-hmm. Postpartum OCD has a chapter all to itself.
Great.
Postpartum PTSD has a chapter. And I also look in there at birth trauma and just trauma in general. And that's actually the second chapter, because I feel like there is an element of trauma in all these PMADs. I wanted trauma to be another theme in the book that people understand better, relate to. So I actually restructured the book while I was writing it to bring trauma up front. Mm-hmm. And then I also do a chapter on psychosis, and I look at that. And then I have a chapter on what other countries are doing in terms of maternal mental health care, especially the UK. Mm-hmm. I touch a little bit on France. and some of the research there. I have a chapter for dads as well, because I felt that was important. Men experience mental illness differently than women. And I had a number of people tell me that while I was writing the book, that I had to do something for men. And I thought, okay, I guess I'd better.
Yeah.
So I did that. And then, I have a chapter on, how women heal, different forms of treatment and healing and things like that. And then I also weave my story throughout. My story is not the focal point, but I had to include it because it's why I wrote the book. So right. I'd like to think there's something in there for everybody. It's a very approachable book, and, it has good research at the core of the human element. So
I love that. I love that you've brought those two things together. Well, it's more than two things, but to really have the personal experience, hear the personal experiences, the lived experience, and have that researched part to back it up. Because we were talking about before, I really think it's powerful to not only hear a story and see, like if you're the mom reading or the therapist reading, and not only see yourself reflected or see your clients reflected, but then have this research to back it up that says, yes, it's not just you. This has been researched and this is what we found. And it's another way to say you're not alone. And you have both sides of that, the personal experience and the research, and what better combination.
Yeah, no, I fully agree with that. While I was doing the reporting, I mentioned the chapter on OCD. I had interviewed John Abramowitz. He's in North Carolina, and he was sharing with me that in his research, he found that almost 100% of new parents, that includes moms and dads, will experience intrusive images after the birth of a child. And that to me was incredible. And that was another point on the continuum of healing for me, because I thought, well, I had these and I felt horrible to have these intrusive images.
Yeah.
I never invited them. I mean, nobody ever invites them, but you feel somehow that you're to blame for them because they're coming into your mind. Mm-hmm. And he proved with his research that they're almost universal. And I thought, oh my goodness, that's just makes me feel so much better.
Right?
Yeah. Even how many years out of having, my first child, and I loved hearing that. So
that makes me think of you must have had many moments like that while writing this book, and how healing it is first of all, just to write your own story and your own stuff, but to be getting this really into the nooks and crannies of things about your own experience, which you're then in turn sharing with other people.
Yeah, it was wonderful. I'm grateful that I had the time and ability to do this and to put it together,
Yeah, it's a lot of work. I know you spent some time on this for sure. And I'm assuming because of your journalist background, you do things pretty carefully.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I've been an editor as well. So I not only wrote the whole book, I mean, I had an editor from my publisher. They edited as well. But, I went back and forth with them quite a bit because I wanted this as perfect as I could get it. Now, nothing is perfect in life, but I mean, if there's a typo in this book, I will be chagrined because I wanted it to be as perfect as it could possibly be because I'm trained in that,
Yeah.
I didn't want any errors for the reader, and I didn't want them to be misled in any way. And, I was extremely careful and diligent in my work, and I felt like I owe that to my reader,
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And to all of us. I mean, there's so many people who are now interested in learning about perinatal mental health and what happens for moms and women. And, there are, of course, going to be stories and anecdotal things that can help explain what's going on. But when you have this lovely combination of the lived experience plus like a reference book on some level that people can go to and like, oh, what does this John guy do? I'm going to go check out his research. You're giving people leads into other places that they can also go and find more information.
No, that's right. That's one of my goals.
It's so powerful. I mean, there's so much great stuff in the book, and from your own personal experience, from your experience in the book that you've written, what are the things you would really like people to know, mothers and partners and providers to know about perinatal mental health?
Sure. So there are a couple of things. I've mentioned this before, but for moms and dads and partners, the person experiencing the perinatal mood and anxiety disorder should find one person to help him or her And that person should be someone that they trust. And it's not always your spouse or partner. It's not always your mom. Like in my case, my mom wasn't there. I did trust my husband. I had a cousin and my husband that I told sort of everything. And I knew that they would never betray my trust. So if you can find just one person, I think that's the key to getting better, because you tell that one person and you'll feel better. You can be honest with them. And then they'll say, okay, what can we do to help you get better? Yeah. Should we call your OB or should we call a therapist? And, I just don't want people to think that it's black and white. Like you have to tell your mom or you have to tell, your spouse or partner. It's not always the case. I mean, some women I interviewed said, I told my coworker because I couldn't tell my parents because they would not understand. And, it's not a one size fits all process. So that's really important for providers and the mom, the person who has the babies, check thyroid levels on that woman, because like I said, you can develop an autoimmune disorder related to your thyroid and not even know it. Right. I had never experienced thyroid problems that I knew of before having kids. My thyroid levels apparently they were fine if they checked them during pregnancy, but they went haywire after. So the thyroid is really important. And then sort of the last thing is this element of hope. PMADs are fully curable. They're nothing to be ashamed of. And nowadays, I feel like we have more and more better and better treatments. So you can certainly tailor the treatment to your needs. So if you hear a woman say, well, I had postpartum anxiety and I took this medication or saw this therapist, that might not be right for you. You have to go with what your body and your mind are telling you. And you can do that in this day and age. We have so many resources available. And I know some areas have fewer resources than others, but if you do the research, I think you can find something that will be tailored to what you need.
Yeah, that is fantastic support. And I love that, you got better, you found your way through your book. You're helping people find their way through and understand what's going on. And the messages that you have here are just fantastic, that people will and can get better with the right kind of help.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story and telling us about the book. I'm going to have links to all things you. People can connect to you and can go get your book on Amazon. And I'll have a link to that in the show notes as well. And for those of you who are listening, please do go check out this book. It is an amazing resource. So thank you so much for being on, Kristina.
Thank you so much, Kat. This was great.
I really love how Kristina has brought together her own lived experience and others' lived experience with some good, solid research and information from experts in the field. I love this in particular because that's also one of the things that we try and do here on the podcast. It's just such a nice balance to be able to hear what really goes on for people and then to have some solid information to back it up and to explain a little bit about what's going on. So I highly suggest that you guys go on Amazon and get When Postpartum Packs a Punch, and for sure leave a review for that book so that more people can find it. If you want to connect with Kristina, go to her website, KristinaCowan.com. She's on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn, and I will put all of those links in the show notes for you to be able to connect with her. And you'll also be able to find information about this episode on the Mom in Mind Facebook page, as well as on our Twitter and Instagram. If you guys want to connect with us on a deeper level, be able to share some information and talk about the things that we discuss on the podcast, go to the Mom in Mind Connection Facebook group. Thank you so much, and until next time. Thank you for joining us today. Please share this podcast. Together, we can support moms and families so that no one has to deal with this alone. Come connect with us on Facebook and Instagram at Mom and Mind.